Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another webinar on heart healthy eating. My name is Veronica and I'm a registered dietitian. I'm co-presenting today with my registered dietitian colleague Fatim that I work with at the Toronto Rehab Cardiac Rehab program. We know that searching Google doesn't make heart healthy eating easy. The nutrition information out there can be overwhelming and sometimes even conflicting. So today we plan to discuss or bust those common myths that we hear related to nutrition and your heart health, providing you with straightforward advice. And here are the ground rules. They include that the session is for education only. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the box that is featured here, and it's actually an icon that says Q&A, so feel free to write any questions that you have during the session in this box, and we will get to it at the end of the presentation. I think I'll also try to use that chat function today too, just so that you're aware. And just remember too, when you are submitting a question, that we can only answer questions generally. If you have a more specific question, for your situation, we would ask that you follow up with your registered dietitian or healthcare provider. Awesome. So now that we're done with the formalities, again, thank you for joining today. And we'll jump into what are some of these common myths. So the first myth I have on the screen here reads, I can't eat fruit because it has sugar. So if you could use that comment box to let me know what you think. Is this a myth or is it a fact? We'll give you a second to jot down your response in that comment section or chat box. Great. Thanks for contributing there. For those of you who guessed, it's a myth. You're right, so that's fantastic. This is something that I do hear in my office all of the time, and I do blame the internet for this. I'm sure you've read that you can't eat fruit because of its sugar content, or perhaps sometimes a lot of patients come in and they're saying that they can't eat a specific fruit. So maybe it's mango or banana or watermelon because it has too much sugar. And they are right about one thing. Fruit does have sugar, but it's a natural form of sugar, which means it comes from, it comes with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. So it's a lot different than a white sugar that's added to things like desserts or other processed foods. Those are what we call empty calories because they don't have that good stuff, the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber that fruit does. We know that as Canadians, we are overeating something called added sugar, and we actually aren't eating enough fruit. This added sugar is the one that has been linked to developing chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, and weight gain. So when we look at the data, looking at Canadians and if they are consuming enough fruit sugar, they aren't. So the latest research we have is in 2017, and it reports that about 28% of Canadians aged 12 or older are reported to consume enough fruits and vegetables, and that's at least 5 servings a day. So basically that means more than 70% of Canadians are not meeting the suggested fruit and vegetable intake. Therefore, more people would benefit from eating more fruit. Research actually shows that people who eat fruit have a lower risk of developing heart disease and cancer. And when we look at Canadians and how much added sugar that they're eating, the latest research is actually a little bit older. It's from 2004. And on average, Canadians are consuming about 110 grams of sugar, which is about 26 teaspoons of sugar, and the most common sources were fruit juice, pop, sweetened coffees, granola bars, flavored yogurt's common, or other baked goods. So these are the foods that we do want to limit because they have low nutritional value and show those health consequences. Whereas natural sugars, remember, contain the vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidants, and they have higher nutritional value. And again, provide us with those health benefits that help protect us from diseases. So how do we choose less added sugars? Well, if we're choosing more whole foods, like fruits and vegetables, we will be avoiding or limiting those added sugars because there'll just be less room in our diet for that. But if you're gonna buy processed foods, in order to try to limit those added sugars, you want to look at that ingredient list. So flip the package over and you can check to see if any sugars have been added to the product. If you see any sugars listed there, it may not say sugar, but it could say things like fruit juice, cane juice, corn syrup, molasses. Those are all different words for sugar. And that would be just make you more aware that sugar has been added to that product. So the bottom line for this myth is that limiting sugar does not apply to fruit. So as I said before, we as Canadians aren't eating enough fruit, and the message should be to eat more vegetables and fruit and less processed foods and beverages. So swap your fruit juice for water and eat your fruit. Now we have the next myth or fact. So the statement reads, is fresh more nutritious? Or fresh is more nutritious, I guess, is the statement. So if you could use the chat box and let me know what you think. Is this a myth or a fact? I'll wait a second for people to respond in the chat box. Great, thank you for contributing. I'm seeing some facts and some myths. So that's great. Again, I appreciate you writing in there. The answer to this is actually a myth. And as you have commented, some do think that it's still a fact. So I want to bring this to attention because I don't want individuals to, avoid canned or frozen fruits and vegetables because they don't think it's more nutritious than fresh. Remember my last slide, we were talking about Canadians not eating enough vegetables and fruit. And that's about 70% of Canadians aged 12 or older aren't meeting that need. So when I ask individuals, how can we increase your vegetable or fruit intake, they're usually asking for more convenient options. And that's typically, why we're reaching for things like granola bars or prepackaged snack type things that have those added sugars in because they're more convenient. They're easy on-the-go foods to eat. So when we think about it, those canned and frozen vegetables and fruits are actually also convenient options. They take little time to prepare and are convenient because they're already chopped and washed. So really we just need to open up a bag or a can and eat. The other thing is the nutritional difference between the fresh, frozen, and canned vegetables is really minuscule. In fact, some of the frozen vegetables and fruit can be more nutritious than fresh because they're flash frozen when they're picked, so they don't actually lose their nutrients when they're traveling to the grocery store. So if you're going to choose some canned and frozen options, just make sure you're choosing the ones without added sugars, added seasonings, or rich sauces. And again, you can determine this by looking at the ingredient list to make sure that the only ingredient listed on the package is that fruit or vegetable that you're buying. Remember that it's so much more important to consume any vegetable or fruit in any state because we know the research studies are research studies say that fruits and vegetables are filled with vitamins, minerals, and fibers. And these are the nutrients that will help us reduce the risk of developing heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and some types of cancer. So the best advice is to buy whatever vegetables you can source and afford and then prepare them in ways you enjoy most, because the bottom line is that we need to eat more vegetables and fruit. So on to the next statement. Low-fat diets are healthy. What do you think? Myth or fact? Again, you can use that chat box or your comments. Great, thank you for contributing. Awesome. So the answer is actually a myth. Low-fat diets are not necessarily healthier. Let me try to flip this side. There we go. About 20 years ago, this was definitely the messaging that everyone should go low-fat. But since then, there have been many excellent research studies that have proven this wrong. In fact, they encourage a higher fat diet. So now it's important to understand the different types of fat that we have in our food system. So I have them listed here on the slide. One's called unsaturated fat, another is saturated fat, and another is called trans fat. So each of these types of fats do something different to our cholesterol levels and impact our health differently. So unsaturated fats are fats that can be found in food products like olive oil, fish, and nuts. And these are the healthier types of fats, or the ones that have been proved or shown to reduce our LDL, or our lousy cholesterol levels. Saturated fats can be unhealthy if we're eating too much of them. So it's all about the amount of these. And these are the types of fat found in animal products. So that could be, the marbling of animal meats. It's also the dairy fat, as well as coconut oil. And then trans fats are very unhealthy, and they've been shown to, increase our LDL, or our lousy cholesterol. They can actually reduce our healthy or HDL cholesterol, and can lead to inflammation. And this type of fat is so bad that Canadians have been in the process of banning it over the last couple of years, and thankfully soon, hopefully this year, it will be banned for good, and you won't be able to purchase it in the grocery store. So now that we understand the different types of fat, we do want to include more of those healthy fats, or those unsaturated fats, in our eating pattern, and that will make our eating pattern not necessarily low fat. So these fats, like I said, the unsaturated fats can reduce our cholesterol levels, and they can also help absorb fat-soluble vitamins. They're very tasty, and they take longer to digest, so they keep us full longer, and perhaps, that helps us eat less calories throughout the day, because we're less likely, or less tempted to snack. So think about when you are thinking about low-fat products in the grocery store, what comes to mind for you? Usually when I'm thinking about low fat, it's usually snack type foods, like candy, licorice, gummy bears. They all usually have low fat on the package, the front of package there. And it looks like it's healthy, because fat-free does appear healthy to us, but just because the product doesn't have fat doesn't mean that it's healthy for us. Usually if it doesn't have fat, it will have a lot of sugar, and as we talked about before, too much of the added sugar isn't good for us either. So the bottom line is that fat is not necessarily the enemy that we once thought it was, and we do encourage you to include some of these healthy fats, those unsaturated fats, the olive oil, fish, and nuts in your eating pattern more often. And I just put this slide in our slide deck for you to compare two different nutrition facts panels. One is a regular product, and the other is a fat-free version of that regular product. So just take a look for a second and notice the difference. Maybe if you want, you can contribute in the chat box as well to let me know what you think the differences between the two. a comment here is the difference is the amount of sugar and the calories. Absolutely. So calories and sugar do come to mind, but also the fat content comes to mind. So you can see here that the regular product, it does have fat, but it doesn't have a lot of that saturated fat. The fat that it's coming from is the unsaturated fat, or the healthier type of fat that we want. So that makes that product good. And the sugars aren't too bad. When we look at the fat-free product, they took away that healthy type of fat and they replaced it with sugar. So you can see the difference from 7 grams to 29 grams. And that's very common in fat-free or low-fat products, that when they take away the fat, they take away a lot of the flavor. So they actually replace it with sugar and sometimes more sodium as well. So when you do see that word fat-free or low-fat on the front of package, I encourage you to flip to that nutrition facts panel and see for yourself what's making, or what the changes are. And this is the last statement I have here, if it's a myth or fact, before I pass it on to Fatim. So what do you think about this statement? Only people with high blood pressure need to restrict their sodium. Let me know, myth or fact. Oops. Awesome. So a lot of people are saying myth, which is absolutely right. We do know that as Canadians, we are eating a lot more sodium than we need. On average, Canadians consume about 3,400 milligrams per day of sodium, and the upper limit is 2,300. But for individuals living with heart disease, we do want to control it to about 1,500 or 2,000. So like I said, Canadians are maybe almost doubling the amount that we need in a day. So in addition to causing high blood pressure, excess sodium can also lead to stroke, heart disease, as well as kidney disease. And most of the sodium we are consuming is coming from processed or packaged foods. And those are things like frozen entrees, broth or bouillon cubes are very common, salty snacks, pickled vegetables, deli meat, condiments, things like barbecue sauce, mustard, ketchup. So these aren't necessarily foods that are giving us a lot of nourishment, vitamins, minerals, or fiber. So what we do want to encourage is to cook at home more often and try flavoring our foods with herbs and spices instead of the sodium. And again, the bottom line is just to recommend that everyone should be choosing more whole foods. So that includes whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and these are naturally low in sodium and higher in nutrients like fiber, vitamins, and minerals. And this will help to not only manage our blood pressure, but also prevent stroke, heart attacks, and even kidney disease. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Fatim to talk about some more myths or facts.
Thanks, Veronica. With so much confusing nutrition information out there, it's not surprising that our patients have a hard time knowing what to believe out there. So I'm going to talk about a few more myths that I hear often, and starting with milk. So milk is not a healthy choice for adults. What do you think? Myth or fact? Okay. Thank you for those who typed in an answer. So for this one, it is a myth. So I come across a lot of adults who have given up on milk. They often believe that milk is only for kids, or that milk has too much sugar and it causes inflammation and weight gain. Some are worried that our milk supply isn't safe because it has too many antibiotics and hormones. I often hear people saying, well, I can get my calcium from nuts or almonds or green vegetables. And then I also come across people who have lactose intolerance, and they're afraid to drink any type of milk. So let's take a look at the facts. When we look at milk, we know it's full of B vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So it's great in terms of the nutrients, it's great in terms of blood pressure management, and it's also a very good source of protein. Now, when we look at the research, it shows that people who take in dairy on a regular basis tend to have healthier body weights, stronger bones, and lower blood pressures. The research also shows that dairy actually doesn't cause any inflammation in our body. And in fact, when we take milk and we make it into fermented products like yogurt or kefir, it actually contains a lot of probiotics, which are good for our gut bacteria, which in turn regulate and decrease the inflammation in our body. So they actually do the opposite of what a lot of people believe. In terms of milk safety, in Canada, we're lucky to have one of the safest milk supplies. And the regulations don't allow the use of growth hormones, and any milk sold has to be free of antibiotics. So I think our milk supply is pretty safe. And then lastly, it is true that if you have lactose intolerant, you maybe can't take large amounts of regular milk. But again, the research supports that you can take smaller quantities of milk spaced out throughout the day. Or if you're going to drink a glass of milk, choose a lactose-free milk, and that's pretty widely available. So I guess our bottom line is that milk can be a healthy choice for most of us. Now, given that, there are reasons why you might want an alternative. So for example, if you have a milk allergy or you just don't like the taste of milk, maybe you're vegan or vegetarian and you're avoiding milk, or you're avoiding milk for other reasons. There are so many milk alternatives in the grocery store, and sometimes it's confusing to know which one is best. So it's always a good idea to look at the label. And so here I've shown 3 of the popular choices in the grocery store. So I have skim milk, soy beverage, and almond milk. So these are the ingredient lists, and you'll notice that vitamin D has been added to all of them, and that's a Health Canada regulation. But you'll notice also with the soy beverage and the almond milk, there are a lot more additives, including salt and sugar that Veronica talked about. So I think, you know, if you are choosing a soy beverage or an almond milk, you want to look for one that's unsweetened and the plain variety. When it comes to dairy milk, whether it's skim milk or 1% milk, there is sugar naturally occurring in that milk, but that's the lactose, which is naturally there, versus the added sugar that you might find in some of these alternative beverages. The other thing you might want to pay attention to is the protein content. So I mentioned that milk is a great source of protein. So a glass of cow's milk is about 9 grams of protein per cup. When we look at soy beverage, it's about 8 grams of protein per cup. But when we look at nut milks like almond milk or cashew milk or oat milk, they only have 1 or 2 grams of protein per cup. So a lot less protein than your regular milk. So you do want to take a look at different brands and maybe compare them and find one that fits your needs. We do have a great video on Cardiac College about choosing milk and alternatives, and you can look at that as well. So to summarize, just let's take a look at the pros and cons of milk. So if we look at dairy, as I mentioned, it's naturally high in vitamins, minerals, and good quality protein. It's very readily available, lots of different varieties of milk, including lactose-free. When we look at the cons, if you have a milk allergy, you definitely want to stay away from dairy. We know that the dairy industry has a bigger environmental impact during production. And with the full-fat dairy, it is higher in saturated fat. So if you're choosing milk, look for the skim or 1%. Now, if you look at the non-dairy, it is an alternative for those who have a milk allergy. It's often lower in calories and sugar, depending on the variety. It's naturally lactose-free and it's plant-based. And it might have less of an environmental impact in production. And it's also low in that saturated fat. The cons would be that it's low in protein and minerals. It often contains many additives, and the taste and price can vary depending again on the type you choose. I think at the end of the day, the type of milk you choose is a personal choice, and it's important that you look at the whole picture and choose a type of milk or alternative that meets your requirements and helps you to reach your nutrient targets for the day. But I think for most of us, we can definitely include dairy in our diet. Okay, so let's move on and look at another common thing that Veronica and I hear. It's a question that comes up a lot as well, and that is coconut oil the healthiest oil to use? So do you think that's a myth or a fact? Maybe you can type it in. Okay, thank you. So some people say myth, some say fact. So when we look at coconut oil, it's almost become a superfood on social media. People cook with it, they bake with it, they even add it to things like smoothies and even their coffee in the morning. I've heard people say it doesn't impact cholesterol levels, that it promotes fat burning because it's a healthy MCT oil, that it helps with digestive issues, it prevents Alzheimer's, and that you can heat it up really high, much higher than olive oil. So let's take a look at what the research actually shows. So when we look at coconut oil, and you might have noticed that it is a solid at room temperature. And most fats that are solid at room temperature are what we call those saturated fats that Veronica talked about. And when we look at coconut oil, it's actually 91% saturated fat. Of that, only 15% is that MCT or medium chain triglyceride oil that people are talking about as healthy. We know that coconut oil might not be as harmful for your cholesterol as animal fats, but like all saturated fats, it will raise your LDL or that lousy cholesterol. In terms of cooking with coconut oil, if you're using extra virgin coconut oil that's not refined, it has a low smoke point and it's actually pretty close to olive oil. It's not higher than olive oil, so you actually can't heat it up very high. And in terms of health benefits, there's very poor quality research around the health benefits. There's actually a large meta-analysis or a study that looked at all the other research papers around earlier this year, and they found that only coconut oil supplements have been shown to help with weight loss, and even then it's very insignificant, the amount. And there's no evidence to show that coconut oil helps with things like irritable bowel syndrome or even Alzheimer's. To get any benefit in terms of brain health, it's actually looking at MCT oil refined on its own. So not enough in coconut oil to make a difference. So our bottom line here is what we've been promoting all along is to use extra virgin olive oil as your main oil for your cooking, for your baking, and on your salads. Lots and lots of research around the olive oil. It's the heart healthiest oil around. It helps increase your good cholesterol. It lowers your bad cholesterol, and it's full of antioxidants, and it's an anti-inflammatory oil. So go ahead and use the olive oil more often than that coconut oil. And then one more. So are gluten-free products healthier than those that contain gluten? Again, something quite popular these days. If you go in the grocery store, you'll see lots and lots of products that are labeled gluten-free. And so if you want to type that in. Okay, thank you. So I think you're right here. Most of you said it is a myth. And if we look at the last few years, gluten-free products have become really popular, and not only for patients who are living with celiac disease. I often hear that gluten causes inflammation and bloating, and that gluten-free products are healthier choices, that they're lower in calories, they promote weight loss. We know there are some books out there, such as Wheat Belly and Grain Brain, that have been promoting going wheat-free. There are a lot of celebrities right now who are promoting gluten-free diets. And if we actually look at the US, about 30% of people consume gluten-free products on a regular basis. That's a huge number compared to a few years ago. So if we look at sort of what gluten is and what it does, basically gluten is just a group of proteins that you find in grains, the most popular being wheat, but you also find it in things like spelt and barley and rye. We know that about 1% of the Canadian population lives with celiac disease, and this is an autoimmune condition where the small intestine has an immune response to gluten, and over time, this actually causes damage to the intestine. At this point, we have no cure for celiac disease, but following a gluten-free diet is crucial to managing the symptoms. So if you are living with celiac, definitely avoiding gluten is the right thing to do. But what about everyone else? So I often hear people who test negative for celiac disease, but they still get symptoms of IBS. So they might get things like bloating or pain, or even symptoms like fatigue or headaches after they eat wheat. So there is a condition called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is being widely researched. But unlike celiac, there's no blood test or biopsy or a way to diagnose it. And it's usually a self-reported condition. There's been quite a bit of research. And what many of the studies show is that when you compare a gluten-containing food with a placebo in these people who report wheat sensitivity, there actually isn't much of a difference in symptoms. And so it's been proposed that it might not be the gluten in wheat that's causing the symptoms, but other compounds. So we have compounds called FODMAPs, or fermentable sugars. There are things called ATIs, or amylase trypsin inhibitors, both of which you find pretty abundant in our wheat products. And so it's really important that if you are experiencing symptoms after eating wheat, you get tested to rule out celiac, but also to figure out what it is that's triggering your symptoms. And you might actually work with a dietitian who can work with you to put you on a low FODMAP diet to find out exactly what the trigger is. And I think in the end, you might find that avoiding certain grains is better for you, but might not be the gluten itself. And then lastly, I mentioned there's lots and lots of gluten-free foods in the grocery store. And in certain stores, you have aisles of gluten-free products. Now, if we actually look at them, a lot of them are a lot more expensive. They're higher in refined carbohydrates and sugar, and they're also lower in fiber. So I have an example for you, and this is a package of a granola bar. And if you'll notice here, they are promoting that it's gluten-free right at the top. The ingredient list, I apologize, it's a little hard to read on the screen, but you'll notice the first ingredient is actually sugar, glucose, and fructose. So all sugars, that's the main ingredient in this bar. If we look at the nutrition facts panel and we look at the numbers, there's only a gram of fiber, or 4%, so it's very low in fiber. But take a look at that sugar, 12 grams of sugar in each bar. And that's all coming from the sugar that they've added. So although they're promoting this as a healthy choice, it might not be a better choice than your regular granola bar. So again, I think our bottom line is that if you do have celiac disease or a confirmed gluten sensitivity, you want to choose gluten-free products. But for the rest of us, I think we want to go beyond that gluten-free claim and actually look at the package, and you might be surprised that maybe going gluten-free isn't lower in sugar or calories than you think. And I think generally in North America, we tend to eat a lot of wheat. So I'm all for trying different grains. You might look for things like quinoa or buckwheat that are naturally gluten-free. You might try different flours. There are a lot of legume flours like chickpea flour out there. and you might use them as a substitute for wheat just to add some different nutrients and add some variety to your diet. But again, go beyond just the gluten-free claim. Okay, so that's it for the claims or the myths we wanted to talk about this afternoon. We'll open it up to questions now, and I see a few have come in.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for submitting your questions, and there's time now to submit more if anything has come up. But I'll address one right now. It's came in, it says, can you define regular peanut butter? And I think this was actually from one of my slides when I was talking about the myth that low-fat diets are actually healthy. And I put regular peanut butter by the trans fat. And so I guess the definition of regular peanut butter is the peanut butter that we've been used to for the last 20 years. The typical Kraft or Skippy peanut butter that you can see on the shelf and that stays on your shelf. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. The newer types of peanut butter are the ones that are all natural, and the only ingredient listed on those are peanuts usually, or the nut. If it's a different nut butter, maybe almond butter, the ingredient would be almonds. That would, I guess, be the newer type of peanut butter that I was referring to. So I'm sorry for not making that clear. The regular peanut butter, the one that we're used to, like I said, the Kraft or Skippy that we keep in the cupboard, does actually have a little bit of trans fat in it, and that's what is actually helping it keep its consistency and its nice spreadability. The natural peanut butter, the newer type, if you've ever bought it before, it actually the oil actually separates, and you can see that there's usually the healthy oil is on the top, and you have to kind of mix it in, and you want to keep that type of peanut butter in your fridge. So trying to maybe transfer or transition yourself from that regular peanut butter to the newer type of peanut butter, the all natural peanut butter, will definitely be healthier for you.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. So this question, are hearts of palm good for diabetes? And do they have a lot of nutrients? Interesting question. So maybe not such a common vegetable that we get fresh in Canada. But oftentimes you can find hearts of palm in a can. It's a vegetable, so not a lot of fat. It's almost zero fat. It does have quite a bit of potassium and a little bit of carbohydrate. So you do want to take a look at that. But I think the biggest concern would be with the canned hearts of palm would be the sodium content. So you want to take a look at that. I haven't come across low sodium ones, but if you do buy a regular can, you probably want to drain and rinse it off before you use it. But it's a tasty addition, and you can add it to salads and things like that. But in coming back to, is it good for diabetics? As Veronica mentioned, all fruits and vegetables are healthy choices. They do come with fiber and nutrients. Some of them do have some natural sugar or carbohydrate, and it's quite doable to fit them into your diet.
Awesome, thanks, Fatim. Another question about eggs. Very common question. What about eggs? How many can we have, and how often can we have eggs? So eggs are a really good source of protein, and they contain actually a lot of other nutrients as well. The good thing about eggs is that it's a protein source that's low in saturated fat. And remember, too much saturated fat can increase our LDL or lousy cholesterol. So it's low in that, so that means it's a good type of protein. A lot of the time we're concerned about eggs because the egg yolk contains the cholesterol. But this type of cholesterol, or dietary cholesterol, doesn't actually affect our blood cholesterol as much as we once thought it did. So we can actually consume some dietary cholesterol, but we don't want to consume too much. So eggs can definitely fit into a heart healthy diet, but you again, don't want to be having too much cholesterol, and cholesterol can be found in other things, like shrimp also is high in cholesterol. So maybe speaking with a dietitian just to see what your eating pattern looks like, and where else dietary cholesterol may be in your eating pattern, can determine how many eggs and how often you could consume them.
Oh, thank you. Question here, is extra virgin coconut oil harmful for people with dementia problems? So good question. So there has been a lot online about coconut oil and dementia, or preventing memory loss or Alzheimer's. I think when we look at the research, a lot of it is just anecdotal. So they're just case studies rather than true randomized trials that look at coconut oil. So we don't really see all the benefits that you read about. That being said, there is more research being done right now around some of the healthier fats that you find in coconut oil. But again, typically, just taking coconut oil that you see in the grocery store shelf won't give you enough to make a difference. It's more of the refined, sort of the pharmaceutical grade that's been shown to have any impact. And overall, in terms of dementia and brain health, the research still favors olive oil as probably the #1 oil to use. So when we look at decreasing inflammation in our brain, and antioxidants that you find in olive oil, those are still found to be a lot healthier than using any other type of oil.
Awesome. And the last question that's here is, I feel very bloated after dinner. Is this is it due to gluten-free food? And unfortunately, that one's a hard one to answer. It's very, bloating is pretty specific to the individual. It could be related to a lot of other factors. So I would encourage you to follow up with your registered dietitian or a health professional to discuss maybe why you are being a little bit more bloated. A good thing to do for yourself in the meantime is maybe to write down what you're eating and at what time, and when you do feel bloated, and that will help you recognize some trends and maybe some foods that may be causing this. But I do encourage you to follow up with someone who can help you to give you some more specific guidelines.
I think that's it for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in and for participating in all your great questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'll just make a plug for tomorrow with Rob. We have a session, the walk and talk with Rob. So join him for a live exercise session. And then next Tuesday, it's actually Fatim and myself. We will be speaking about mindful eating practices for the Women with Heart online series. So tune into that if that's a topic of interest. But again, like Fatim said, thank you for joining and thank you for contributing. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.